final place where you can get to the point where you can start talking about award and bids. So the first thing you have to do is you're going to have to do an actual assessment of your system security plan. Here is a link just below it at the top. It's a rather long link, but that is the methodology that is posted on the OSD site of how to run the checklist to do the actual NIST SP 800-171 assessment, your basic assessment. And I wish I could tell you I'm going to tell you more about it, but I'm not. You have to go run that. Recommendation generally is to talk to your IT folks because they'll know exactly how to do that. When you've run that, the end result will be a score with a maximum of 110. And that number, with a few other pieces of information, is what you're going to post in SPRS. Now, concurrent to this operation, while your ITer is out doing this assessment of your SSP, you can start getting ready to go into SPRS to enter the result once they have it. So the first thing you need to do is go to Dun and Bradstreet right now and get yourself a DUNS number. Probably already have one, but if you don't, that is actually going to be your UEI as well. I know it's a little confusing, and I'm going to help you out with that. After you have the DUNS number, this is what you need so you can go into SAM and register your company. So once you have your DUNS, you're going to go to SAM and you're going to set up a user account in SAM. After you set up the user account, you're going to register your entities. If you're a small company, you probably have one entity. If you're a larger company, you will have multiple entities. If you are Northrop Grumman, you have hundreds of entities. After that, as you're registering your account and your entities, you're going to set up your electronic business POC. This is the person that the government goes to when they have questions about your company. This is actually a very useful name to have. The person you appoint as your EBPOC is actually going to be useful later managing your PI account as well. Through that process, the good folks at SAM are going to go to DLA's site, cage.dla.mil. They're going to validate your company data. The folks at DLA may come back to you directly to ask for additional information before they can assign you a cage. And once they've done that, you will see your cages appear. You'll probably get an email from the good folks at DLA. But SAM will show your cages. So once you have a cage, those cages assigned to you, and they're a 5-digit alphanumeric code, that's what you'll live by basically on the DoD side. Then you have to establish in SAM your cage hierarchy. So the only time you're actually going to talk to the folks at cage is just to answer any validation questions they may have that they didn't get from what you told SAM. You may have to tell them directly. After that, you're never really going to talk to cage, the cage program again. So if you have multiple cages, you're going to go into SAM to make sure that your cage hierarchy is correct. We'll talk about what that takes. And then, now that you have a cage, you're going to be able to set up a PI account. PI is the system where you can go in and get signed into Wide Area Workflow, which is WAF. If you've ever done business with the DoD, you know about WAF because that's the vouchering system. If you've been paid by the DoD, you already have a PI account. So you're going to set up your account presence, your company's presence in PI. You're going to make sure that you have a contractor administrator. So like you had the EBPOC over in SAM managing your SAM account. Now you're going to have a contractor administrator, someone managing your PI account. And by the way, that's probably the same person. That's why I said it's really good to know who your EBPOC is. And that's the person who's the gatekeeper in PI. That's the person who's going to grant your employees access to WAF to make sure that you can get vouchered and get paid, that you can get access to SPRS, which is another IT system under PI, so you can enter your NIST assessments, and also you can actually see your quality and delivery scores in SPRS. So you're going to establish those user accounts, and then you're going to get your CAM to approve a SPRS cyber vendor role. You're going to hear me say SPRS cyber vendor role a lot because that is the key. You have to have that role to enter your NIST assessment results. And finally, after you've done all that, you can finally enter your basic assessment results in SPRS. So you're going to get a DUNS number. You're going to get registered in SAM. SAM's going to get you cages. You're going to take those cages over to PI, set up accounts in PI, make sure you have an account with a SPRS cyber vendor role in SPRS, and then you can enter your assessments. And now we're just going to talk about what all these steps look like. Next slide, please. So the first thing we talked about is you have to have a DUNS before we start out with this. Most companies already have one. They've registered with Dun & Bradstreet to get a DUNS number. It's a 9 to 13 digit number. It's unique. I'm not going to read everything on these slides. They're rather wordy. They're meant for you to take home and to review later and to use as a bit of a reference. Most of this is coming off the websites for SAM and for DUNS. But they will assign you this number. Right now, everyone gets a DUNS, and that's what they use in SAM. I will tell you that the DoD and the federal government is moving from relying on the DUNS number, and they are creating their own unique identifier, and that's the unique entity identifier, the UEI. So that migration is going to happen on right now it's set to happen on the 4th of April next year. So for now, the DUNS you have, if you want to do business with the government right now, you're going to go to Dun & Bradstreet and get a DUNS. The expectation is your UEI is going to look a lot like your DUNS. The actual word down from the good folks at IAE and GSA who run SAM, how that transition is going on, going to affect you. You're going to get contacted about that. Is my expectation. You will definitely move eventually to a UEI. If you register down the road, you won't be getting a DUNS number. You're going to go directly to SAM, and that's going to work out your UEI. But in the meantime, right now, you do need to go get a DUNS, and that will count as your UEI. That is why throughout this presentation, I'm going to talk about the DUNS and the UEI interchangeably. So down at the bottom, you'll see right off what I just said about SAM and about UEIs and DUNS. As you can see that you have to have a UEI. And oh, by the way, right now, your DUNS number is your official UEI. So that's DUNS. Next, please. So you have to have your DUNS number so you can even register in SAM. And that's what you're going to do. You can request it. And there's a form. You go to the DUNS website. You see the information down at the bottom, and I'll tell you how to get it. Next slide, please. So these are the types of things you have to get a DUNS number. The good folks at Dun & Bradstreet are going to ask for this. Here's just a list of it. There may be additional information as well. Next slide, please. So this is the first step in the word hierarchy. Here's another word that you're going to hear quite a bit about that's going to be a maker or breaker when it comes to success in entering your NIST assessment results in SPRS. It's very important that if you have multiple entities, if you have multiple cages, for example, if you have multiple DUNS, for example, it's very important that that hierarchy is properly established, that your headquarters is up at the top, that the lower divisions are down toward the bottom. That begins here at D&B. You're going to set up your hierarchy there, and those are going to get sent over to SAM as a family tree. Next slide, please. So now you have your D&B. Now it's time to go, your DUNS number, you've been over to D&B. Now it's time to go into SAM and get registered. So SAM is the place where if you want to do business with the federal government, this is where you have to go. I have some links down at the bottom that will help you through it. They just actually revamped this system. It originally was multiple systems that emerged into one that became SAM. And now it's, I will say, one of the few systems I will see in the federal government that actually kind of works as advertised. So it seems like it's hard to negotiate the murky waters of federal regulation. SAM is actually not too bad. Next slide, please. So the first thing you have to do is create a login.gov account. This gives you access to several things, but one of them obviously is SAM. It's going to have an overview link right there. There's some data that you're going to have to put together. There's a link, the list of the step 2 of preparing your data. I cut and paste this right off the SAM website for the most recent update for what the steps it takes to register in SAM. And then 2A, additional information if you're planning to pursue federal contracts, particularly inside the DoD. Next slide, please. And then remember I said it's important to have an EBPOC set up. That person is the one who authorizes vendors to submit and modify changes in there. It's kind of the gatekeeper for SAM. This is also the person that SAM is going to make phone calls to when they're going to be listed on the SAM site. So if somebody looks up your SAM record and says, who should I call in this company? That's the person they're going to call first. That person can have up to 2 EBPOCs in your company, a primary and alternate. That's obviously a good idea to have for each of the CANE or UEIs or DUNS, each of the entities that you have set up in SAM. Next slide, please. All right, we're getting closer now. So now here we are in SAM. We've set up an account, and SAM will go behind the scenes to CAGE and get you assigned a CAGE code. So they have an electronic connection with CAGE. It's almost real time. They will, as soon as you register, they will go out to CAGE and say, we have a new company. We want to get them CAGE codes for the following entities. CAGE in turn may contact you, the CAGE program folks may contact you asking for additional information in response to this request from SAM. Your CAGE code, like I said, is a 5-digit alphanumeric identifier. That's what the DoD will know you as. I will tell you that, people who are contracting officers, they're buyers, especially logisticians, the people who are managing parts that you may be selling, services that you may be selling. They actually probably know you better by your CAGE than they know by your company name. It is the coin of the realm for us. So you're going to get a CAGE assigned or multiple CAGEs if you have additional entities. Next slide, please. All right, here we go. Now we're getting into one of the most important parts of it. So here you are in SAM. SAM has talked to CAGE. You go back to your SAM record and now you see CAGEs appear. So that means that they've already talked to CAGE and CAGE has assigned you CAGEs. They appear in SAM. In SAM is where you manage that family tree hierarchy of what DoD, the rest of the DoD will see. So it's very important, I'm going to foot stomp this, and I wish you could hear me do it. My cat is about to jump. I will foot stomp that this is a very important step, especially if you have multiple entities. Make sure your CAGE hierarchy is correct in SAM. So you have to make sure that your HLOs and ILOs are correct. What are we talking about? You have one top CAGE that is called your highest level owner, or HLO. Your company should only have one of them. As they would say in TurboTax, you may have more than one, but this is rare. It is very rare. You should only have one. You may have division CAGEs. Right below the highest level owner, you're going to have subdivisions. Those are going to be called immediate owners if they have additional CAGEs assigned to them. Excuse me. So each entry should show each of these CAGEs, except for the HLO itself, will have an HLO and an ILO. So CAGE 3 will have an HLO of CAGE 1 and an IO of CAGE 1. On the right side, if you look at CAGE 4, this is one of the lower CAGEs in that tree. Its HLO is CAGE 1, but its IO is CAGE 3 because it reports to the division that is run by CAGE 3, and it always has an HLO. You will notice that each record has an HLO. It knows what its highest level owner is. You can check this hierarchy not only in SAM, but you can also check it in SPRS, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So you can see what has flowed from SAM to CAGE, through CAGE, you don't see that again, to me, and I will get those updates. And if it's correct in SPRS, then you will be able to post your NIST assessment correctly. And you can see it goes from SAM to DLA, the CAGE system, to me. I'm going to put this little red box here quite a bit. If your hierarchy is wrong, you won't be able to select all your CAGEs when you are entering your SSP results, your NIST results. Next slide, please. So how to manage this, how to correct it. If you think that it's wrong, or if you're just going to review it, this is exactly what to do. First of all, you go to SAM, right? You're going to go into SAM, and you're going to fix your HLOs and ILOs. You'll see that this is the SAM record. This is an example of it. Imagine for a company CAGE 5, that's their CAGE. And you can see all the information about that company down there. And at the bottom, I zoomed in and you can see the HLO and IO information for that company. It has a HLO of cage 1 and the IO of cage 3. Again, in the middle, you can see the tree that we had in the previous slide. That's the correct organization for this company. Once you've updated this in SAM, it flows over to DLA cage almost immediately. And then from DLA cage, we have a feed where it flows to SPRS. We get that feed about every half hour to an hour, and we get updates. We typically advertise it will take up to 48 hours for us to get changes from SAM fed over to us. Obviously, we do that because there's glitches in the system, because there are system downtime that is involved. I will tell you that if you do this at 8 o'clock in the morning, typically by lunchtime, we have your updated hierarchy in our system, and often sooner than that. So step 1, go over to SAM and fix it. Step 2 is check it. You'll notice there's no step at cage. Remember I said, you're not going to talk to the folks at DLA at cage. It's very rare. It goes automatically from SAM, goes to cage feeds it to us. And then how can you check it? You can go into your SPRS account. There's a compliance reports menu link, and it says cage hierarchy. You click on that and it's going to show you your cage hierarchy. You can verify that your changes from SAM came over to us. If they didn't come over to us, you need to go back to SAM to make sure that every company, every cage has an HLO. This is the most important part of it. Every cage has to have the correct HLO, and it should have an ILO if it has one assigned. Again, the red box at the bottom. If your hierarchy is wrong, you will not be able to select all your cages. So hang on to this. This tells you how to go fix it. Next slide, please. So now you're in cage, and now your hierarchy is correct in SAM, and it's probably been already sent over to SPRS. So how do I get access to that? Well, you're going to need an account in PI, the Procurement Integrated Environment. You're going to go in and get your account there. A cage is required to even register your company in PI, and that's what you're going to do. This is the system that manages not only SPRS, but it also manages the system if you have a DCMA contractor a representative. They're going in there as well, a contracting officer representative, and of course, WAF, the big one. That's where you get paid. We also use it. It's a single sign-on. This is the system that OSD contracting and procurement people use for all these items. Next slide, please. So you're going to go to PI. How do I get it registered in PI? You go to their landing page. It's got a really good link right there, and it will have a good PI guide about how to get registered in PI, how to make sure you have a CAM. They have a pretty good help desk as well. You can contact them. Next slide, please. This is a very important step, and we have a lot of people who struggle with this. You have to establish a CAM. You just have to have one user on your PI account that allows the other users, that approves the other users. So you're going to designate a CAM, a contractor administrator for your company. This is mandatory. And generally, it's the same person as the EBPOC. It's really important that you have this. You can have more than one, as a matter of fact, for your company. So it's important to have this. When you have a new person, if you hired someone new that you needed to go into SPRS, for example, they're going to apply for a PI account for your company. Their supervisor has to say, yes, this person deserves it. The CAM is the one that activates that actual role, because there's multiple roles, right? Some people can get into WAF. Some people can look at WAF in your company. Some people can edit information in WAF, and those might be different people. Some people you don't want to have going in and editing your data. You want them to view it, and that's why you'll see multiple roles. Next slide, please. So now that your company is in PI, you want people to have SPRS roles to be able to enter their NIST results and maybe even see your scores. There are two SPRS roles in PI that would apply to a vendor. The first one on the left is the contractor vendor support role. This one allows you to view, not edit, but view NIST results. It also allows them to see the cage hierarchy. But this is the one that most people would normally get because they want to monitor their supplier risk score. They want to manage their, to view their delivery and quality scores. And if they have any challenges that they want to make to the delivery and quality scores, this is actually what SPRS is about. Contracting officers, when you want to sell the government something, they will go to SPRS and see how your quality and delivery results are. And that goes into the calculation. That's straight out of the DFARS. Not only do they do it, but they require to do it. If you are the person that's going to enter and edit the NIST results, you also need the SPRS cyber vendor role. There are two roles, right? And if you want to be able to enter the results, you're going to have this role as well. It allows you to add and enter. It also allows you to see the hierarchy. I will say here, there's another red box. If you don't see as you're editing through, and if people have done this already, they probably already know. If you don't see the create new HLO cage, you don't have the SPRS cyber vendor user role. So what that means is that you may have the left role, the SPRS contractor vendor role. You can go to NIST, but you can quickly see that you're not able to add assessments. The reason why, you don't have a SPRS cyber vendor role. Next slide, please. So finally, we are finally at SPRS right here. What does SPRS do? I told you that we give, it's the, well, Ted, this is right out of the DODI 5000.79 is the authoritative source for supplier and product performance information. The DOD gathers a lot of information about its suppliers and the material that it gets and the services it gets from the suppliers as well. So we take that, we score people's ability to deliver on time. We also score the quality of the material that they provide us based on inspections, basically, and use experience in the field and other type things. When you have a CPAR, if you have CPARs, those are reported to SPRS. If you have a FAPIS record, if you've had a contract canceled, that is reported to SPRS, and that is shown in the supplier risk report, where a contracting officer can see how risky you are. That's the other half, the larger half of what actually SPRS does. Next slide, please. So now we are at the good point. Now here we are. After all this, now we can actually add an assessment. We've done our assessment. Now we can add it. So you're going to go into PI. You're going to select the SPRS icon of all the icons that you have available. Then in SPRS, you're going to select NIST SP 800-171. You'll see that under compliance reports. You're going to click on that. And the first time you do this, you have to create a header for your company, right? And this is going to be based on the HLO, your highest level, your headquarters, because you may have multiple assessments for multiple subordinate cages. You're certainly going to have multiple assessments because if you have more than one SSP, you're going to have two different assessments. If you have an assessment that you are entering, your basic assessment, and then DCMA comes in, DIDCAT guys, come in and do an assessment on your SSP, they're going to have another assessment of that same SSP. So they're all organized under this header for your HLO. So you're going to go in, and once you click on that, you're going to have an opportunity to click on the Create New HLO header. HLO cage, excuse me. The lower left, you'll see again the red box. If you don't see this button, that means you do not have the SPRS cyber vendor user role. You need to go get that. Get your CAM to approve that for you. Once you've done that, you click on that. It'll give you the opportunity to enter your HLO cage. You can search for those. Your company name will come up because we got that from Sam. Then you're going to enter the confidence level that you're able to do. It's only going to be basic for you. And then the standards, the assessment standard right now is NIST SP 800-171. So we're finally entering those. Now, what does it take to enter it? What do our assessment results look like when I enter them? Next slide, please. So as you go in, you're going to be given an opportunity to enter, now that you've created a header, a new assessment. This company already has a couple assessments already in here. They have one for enclaves and one for overall enterprise. You can add a new assessment and click. By the way, again, if you don't see the add new assessment, if you've already created a header, but you're not given it a chance to put a new assessment in. You don't have the SPRS cyber vendor role. You just have the regular role where you can look. Next slide, please. After clicking the add new assessment, we can add new assessment results right here. So this is what it takes. So you'll see the list of information that you have to add, and until you've added all this, you won't be able to save it. The assessment date is the date that you did the actual assessment. The score is a numeric value with the maximum of 110. I've seen some folks try to send us one with its 222. High score is 110. So if you've done the methodology, run that checklist, you'll have a score that only goes up to 110. You may have a negative number here, by the way, and it will accept that as well. The assessing scope. This is what the assessment applies to, what the SSP applies to. Is it enterprise, enclave, or contract? We have additional information on our website that gives you some assistance in this, but I will tell you, if you have questions about this, we recommend you talk to your DCMA representative, because this program is actually run by DCMA, the policy side. The plan of action completion date. This is the date if you have less than 110. This is the date you expect to be at 110. This will be a future date where you're going to tell the government, but I was at a 92, but I expect to be a 110 by some future date. The SSP assessed, that's the title of the SSP. The SSP version of, or revision, that's just the version or the revision number of that SSP. And then the SSP date, the publication date of your SSP. What is the date of the current SSP or the version or revision that you're posting? Then you're going to open up your cage hierarchy. You're going to click on that, and that's going to list all the cages that may be covered by the SSP. Your company is not being rated. The cages are not being rated in this. The system security plan is being rated. You have an assessment on that. You have a score. Now you're going to say what companies, what cages in your company are subject to this SSP. And that's all you're going to do. You're going to open that up. You're going to see a list of your cages. You can click on them, and you can say it's going to be this cage, but not that cage. And it has a bunch of checkboxes. In addition, you'll see it says include the HLO. If you're a company of one or two, you're probably always going to check this because it's the only one cage. If you're a larger company, that SSP may or may not apply to your highest level owner. If it does, you need to click there. And again, if a cage is missing here, if you open up your cage hierarchy and don't see one of your cages you expected to see, you need to go fix it in the SAM, because there's a problem with an HLO or an ILO in one of those SAM entries. Next slide, please. I see a question in the chat. It says, how long is the score valid? Right now, I think the guidance is going to be that they are good for 3 years, but I have not seen anything in writing about that. Your DCMA DIBCAT people or your contracting officer to be the person to tell you. So here are some pointers now. We've seen the long path that we took here with our GPS to get to the point where we can actually enter the assessment. Here's some pointers for some stumbling blocks. The first question, why can't I find one of my cages? As I've said, that probably is because your HLO or ILO information for one of those cages is wrong. So where do you fix it? Don't call the SAM. You go to SAM to fix it. Please don't call my help desk. If you call my help desk or you get on my feedback system, all I'm going to do is I'm going to send you to SAM because they can fix it. I actually can't fix it. It has to get fixed in SAM. And like I said, it flows within a few hours. We advertise 48, but it usually goes much quicker than that. Why don't I see this button? I went through all this and I tried to enter my header and I can't do it. Why? Because you don't have the SPRS cyber vendor role. Make sure your CAM has given you that access. Why is my SPRS cyber vendor role still pending? That's because your supervisor needs to approve it for you, but your CAM hasn't done the actual approval yet. So when you apply, your boss has to say, yes, you can have this role. And then the CAM is the one who activates it. I will say this too, and this is buried in all the information that you might see over at PI. CAMs can approve everybody else's role, but they can't approve their own. So it's really helpful to have more than one CAM. If you are the only CAM for your company, if you're like the only person that has an account with Pi, so you're not only the CAM, but you're also the user, that's okay. Talk to the Pi help desk and they'll approve you. It's not a problem. Because once you tell them, hey, I'm the CAM and I can't get this approved, they're going to approve you right away. And finally, here's another stumbling block. I created a header, but now it's gone. So sometimes folks will go in and they'll create the header, go, okay, we're still waiting for the SSP results. We don't know what our score is, but let me go in and enter my header. They'll create the header, but for one reason or another, they won't enter an entire assessment. They'll go in and say, I don't have the score yet, or I have to go to lunch and I haven't finished it. So they'll save it till later. Until you've completely filled in the assessment results, those are not saved. So every so often, and I will say it's every few months, it's not like every day, we'll go out and see how many headers are sitting out there without any data in them, and the blank headers will be deleted. That's all. If you have a header, though, that doesn't have, you got your header in there, but you don't have any assessments with it, you're going to get a warning when you log in. It's like, just want to let you know, you've got a header, but there's no assessments for it. So just reminding you, don't forget, you aren't done yet. You are not in compliance. No one can see the results of your assessment because you haven't officially saved them yet. So you'll get that login message when you come in. As soon as you save your results, when you are entering the NIST assessment results, those are available to your contracting officer immediately. There's no processing. You entered your results, you save it, it's done. Next slide, please. So what do we talk about today? So this was I just wanted to give you a quick GPS, not as good as Waves, but it's fairly helpful. How you're going to get to how to do the assessment, where to go get the information for it. The fact that you're going to need a DUNS, which is going to be the UEI. You got to register in SAM. Make sure your hierarchy is correct there. You're going to go to Pi so you can get paid with WAF and you can enter your NIST assessments. And then exactly what it takes to put your results into SPRS. Next slide, please. And that's all I have for you today. Happy to answer any questions people have.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for your time. I know I definitely don't want to hold you up for the whole meeting because I know you're a busy man, but I just wanted to, some of the questions that we saw were, what is the role of NIST in the DoD contracting?
So the DFARS requires a couple things. First of all, it requires that the contractors, that people who are going to be handling CUI have controlled unclassified information, right? Also used to be known as FOUO. They have to have a basic assessment posted in SPRS. Their contracting officers are required to go into SPRS and verify that you have this. So if you're trying to get a contract and they keep telling you that you don't have one of these, that's because they've gone to SPRS and they don't see your results. So you need to have this posted in SPRS before, by regulation, they can award the contract. A couple other things are going on too. If you're a prime contractor, you have to make sure that by the same chapter of the DFARS, you have to make sure that your subs are actually in compliance as well. And the same is going to be for CMMC when that comes online. Can you enter different organization assessments results if we have vendor role, a different organization? You can, not really sure what you're asking. You can enter the results for any entity under your HLO. So if you work in a subdivision of your company, you can enter and edit results for anybody in the larger corporation, anybody in your hierarchy tree. But you can't enter results for another company. They can't. You don't have access to another company's outside your hierarchy information. You can't see it either, and they can't see yours.
Definitely. Thank you so
Just
much.
more valid. We talked about it. Said, why do we need it done? As they just looked down on information they took down our information without verification. I can't speak to that. It's always been for SAM that requires everybody to have a DUNS number. And obviously there's additional validations and checks that go on to get registered in SAM.
All right. Thank you so much, John. And Yeah, we could definitely assist that client with the done questions later on down, maybe off.
No problem. And for
John, thank you
joint
so
ventures,
much.
I will tell you, are a little complicated. But you will see that for joint ventures, either the joint venture itself is an HLO or it reports to one of the major companies in the venture, and that's the person that's going to enter it.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much, John, for your time. We're going to move on to our next speaker, Christian Carter, who representing Tome Tech, and he's going to be covering CMMC level 1 to 3, NIST 800, and some of the changes to CMMC 2.0 that might be coming up to us since that changed about a week ago. Thank you so much, Chris.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nelson. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I believe this is the one we're looking for. Can you see that on the screen? Hopefully that's working.
Yes, we could see your screen now.
Okay, perfect. Then I'll put myself in front of this presentation. That's pretty handy dandy. Of all of the platforms, I've never seen this, so I really like this. Great. So like Nelson said, I'm Christian from Totem Technologies, and I'm here to talk a little bit about CMMC and NIST 800-171, a lot of the things that John spoke to. And it was very interesting to hear his insight because I'm oftentimes on the other side of things. So it's great to hear someone from SPRS and how that whole process works. Because Totem as a company, we help companies to actually get their score and to work on their system security plans, things like that. So today I want to break down these requirements that we're facing and how we can be compliant to them and some of the changes that are going on. So first, there we go. So who we are, Totem Technologies is actually part of a parent company called Haight Bain Associates. So Haight Bain Associates is a small minority veteran-owned business, and we have contracts with the Air Force managing weather systems. So when those parts get old or broken, we're sending those bases new parts and managing those weather systems. So something about Totem Tech is that we actually are a prime contractor. We're a very small prime contractor. We have, I think, about 12 employees. So we're very small and we're going through these same requirements ourselves. And so we're able to add that perspective as we're helping our contracting peers. So we are located in Utah in a town called West Haven, which is about 40 minutes north of Salt Lake. And as you can see here in that picture, we got the beautiful Rocky Mountains. Utah is a great place to be. And then we also have a small engineering office in Baltimore, Maryland. We'll go next slide. So first I want to kind of paint a picture of why this is important. So obviously we are required to protect our information, right? But we need to get out of the mindset that this is just checking a box. We need to develop a cybersecurity culture to keep all of our information safe from foreign adversaries. And so here's one of my favorite examples of this. You will see this plane right here. It looks a lot like our F-35, right? Produced by Lockheed Martin. However, it is not. This is the J-31, which is essentially a Chinese copycat of the Lockheed Martin F-35. So there's a few differences between the two, not only in looks, but in price as well. And so this is a great example of our adversaries, specifically China in this example, attacking the supply chain of Lockheed Martin to assemble this J-31. And just to kind of give you an example, the F-35 costs around $100 million for Lockheed Martin to produce, whereas the J-31 is the copycat of this F-35, and it costs about $10 million to produce. So obviously there is a huge difference there. And our foreign adversaries are not attacking Lockheed Martin specifically. They are attacking the supply chain. They're attacking the little guys. And a lot of our clients will say to us, well, I'm just a little shop, right? So I don't really have anything to worry about. But that is false. Adversaries are attacking the little guys and piecing together that information to put these projects together. And the J31 is a great example of that. So let's talk about these cybersecurity compliance drivers. So first, everybody who has a federal contract with the government is going to handle federal contract information, or you'll see it as FCI. And so this is in the FAR clause 52.204-21. And the FAR 17 are the different controls that make up basic cybersecurity requirements. And so this is going to cover a CMMC level 1. And then you'll also have CUI, or controlled unclassified information, as John previously talked about. And this is going to be for covered defense information. So this is information that is sensitive, but is not secret or top secret, but it's something that we don't want in the hands of our adversaries, right? It's something that we're not going to go and post on social media or make available to the public. And so in the DFARS clause 252.204-7012, it calls out NIST 800-171 as the framework that we're going to work under in order to protect that information. And I saw that there was a question in the chat as far as NIST and their role. So NIST is the National Institute of Security and or Certification and Technology. I can't remember off the top of my head. But they essentially have created this framework for us to work under. And they also have different frameworks for classified information and so forth. And so we draw from that NIST 800, and there's a subset of that called the 800-171 that we work under to protect that controlled unclassified information. So this is a little bit of a breakdown of how this all works. So you see in the top right, we have this basic safeguarding of covered contract info systems. And so this is the federal contract information that we're supposed to protect. And so this CFR 52204-21, this was passed back in October of 2016 to protect this federal contract information. And so you'll see here in the middle, there's this federal contract information, and then a subset of that is CUI, which is that controlled unclassified information, the more sensitive stuff that we are required to protect. So controlled unclassified information was created back in November 2010 under the Obama administration, and it is called out for contractors to protect that information. So as you see, the Department of Defense has required in this DFAR 7012, they have required 3 things that we have to do. So we have to have adequate security, and then we have to have an incident response and reporting capability. And so this is called out in that NIST 800-171 in protecting CUI and non-federal systems and organizations. So the 3 things that you have to be compliant with NIST 800-171 is, first, you have to have a system security plan. And the system security plan is essentially a set of blueprints for your network security and how you are compliant to the certain controls that are set forth. So the second thing that you'll need is a plan of action and milestones. Like John was saying, a lot of times companies, and I would say most often, companies are doing their self-assessment scores and they're in the negatives, right? And he talked a little bit about, at what point am I going to be at 110? So this plan of action and milestones is essentially your plan that you set of how you're going to close all of those gaps in your system to get at that perfect 110 score. So you don't have to have everything implemented to be compliant with NIST 800-171. As long as it's called out in your plan of action and milestones and you have plans to put those in place, then you are compliant to NIST 800-171. And then the last thing that you'll need is an incident response plan. So you have to have the capability to report to the government if anything was to happen and your system was to be breached. And so you'll see down here, we talked a little bit about this earlier. In November 2019, the DoD came out with their assessment methodology. And so this is the methodology in which we score ourselves through a self-assessment. And this is the score that we'll put into the SPRS system. And then you'll see that this is the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, or CMMC. So this came out, it's supposed to be rolled out back in January of 2020. And there has been a lot of changes to this, which we're going to get into here in a minute. But this is all wrapped around controlling this controlled unclassified information. We have to protect that information. And so there's a quick definition down here. It's any information that the government creates or possesses, or that an entity creates or possesses for or on behalf of the government. So this is anything that is created specifically for the government. And whether they generate it and you handle it, or you generate it and send it on, that is information that you have to protect. Okay, so protecting our federal contract information. So this is going just into a little bit more detail about the FAR 17. These are the 17 basic safeguards that we put in place to protect that federal contract information. So you'll see that these 17 practices are also included in NIST 800-171, and these are all of the practices that make up a CMMC level 1. And another note on this, all government contractors, whether they possess CUI or not, will have to comply to the FAR 17 to protect that federal contract information. So now the difference between NIST 800-171 and CMMC. So NIST 800-171 is the current regime. That's what we're currently required to put in place if we're handling controlled unclassified information. So this is made up of 110 controls, and that's where that perfect score of 110 comes from with that assessment methodology or that score that you have to put into SPRS. And 320 different assessment objectives within those 110 controls. So there are 320 things that you have to do or that you have to put in place within your organization to be compliant to this requirement. So you can have a plan of action and milestone to cover a lot of those gaps. Like I said before, you can be compliant to NIST 800-171 without having everything in place. And then these are performed by self-assessment submitted to the DoD through that SPRS system like we talked about. I know John briefly touched on this as well. The DCMA will be conducting audits for those DoD contractors, and they kind of just pick and choose, and those are done through DIBCAC. And so that's NIST 800-171. Now, transitioning into CMMC, now this is a little bit different. So this says that there's 5 levels of cybersecurity maturity. As of 2 weeks ago, there are now 3 levels. And so we're going to go through those changes. And these range from 17 different practices to 173 practices. And the practices must be implemented on case by case. And the DoD has said that it will be project specific. And so we'll get into that a little bit later. But all DoD contractors will need that certification. Some will self-assess and some will have to have a third-party certification, like I said, depending on the project that they are working on. And the DoD will let you know before contract award whether or not you will have to self-assess or if you're part of a program that will have to have that third-party certification. So you see here on the side that these will be complementary and concurrent, and we'll go through the new CMMC model here in a second, and you'll see how that takes place. Okay, so NIST 800-171, this is kind of how this is broken down as far as structure goes. So you'll see that at the top, there are 14 different families of controls. These are different sections to be covered. And for example, these will be, like physical security, locking down your building. And then it will also be things like access control, managing passwords and having certain policies for passwords, things like that. These 110 controls are what you actually have to implement to be compliant. And this is a subset of those 14 families. And then these 320 assessment objectives are the actions that you have to take. So you see down at the bottom, we refer to these as organizational actions because these are the things that you actually have to do in order to be compliant to these controls. Okay, so this is a model of the old CMMC. This is a level 1. And I put this up here so you can kind of see the difference in how these changes are going to affect contractors. So in the past, it was such that you have to be 100% implemented to be able to compete in any contracts if you were handling controlled unclassified information, so that CUI. And so it used to be broken down into 5 different levels. This level 1 being basic, this level 2, there was kind of a gray area in between handling CUI and not handling CUI. And then this level 3 is where you were handling CUI and you had to be 100% implemented with NIST 800-171. And then there was 20 additional controls added onto that made up CMMC level 3. And then you have the CMMC level 5. And these are going to be, that was going to be for companies who were constantly dealing with those APTs, or advanced persistent threat. And those are going to be like the Chinas, the North Koreas, things of that nature. So, and then you'll see on the side, we have the 17 capability domains. These are the different families that I was talking about, in which we have to adhere to. And there are different subsets of these rules, and these are where the controls fall under. So basics of CMMC. So it used to be, like I said, that you have to have a license to operate, right? You have to have that CMMC certification. This is now such with CMMC 2.0, just coming out about 2 weeks ago, that the CMMC certification is required on some of the DoD contracts. So you'll see in the next slide, I believe, how it's broken down into 3 different levels. If you're handling a level 2, that means that you are handling that CUI, and it will be stated in your contract whether or not you have to be fully implemented, or whether or not you can use your plan of action milestones or your POAM to cover a lot of those gaps and tell the government that you are working towards that perfect score. So CMMC third-party assessment organizations, or C3PAOs, are responsible for issuing those certifications. That is all done through what's called the CMMC AB, or the accreditation body. And all of those trainers and assessors are approved through that organization. And this has all been delayed, as you can see, and with level 2, a lot of this has, or CMMC 2.0, this has been pushed to the right, and some of this has been taken out. The original plan was in early 2021, they were going to phase in 10 contracts, and throughout the next 6 years, they would have all DoD contractors where they needed to be as far as CMMC certification. This is no longer the case. We're kind of still waiting on a lot of the timeline. In the latest CMMC town hall meeting that I attended from the accreditation body, they said that within the next 9 to 18 months, they said, is when this should be passed into law. So it's in the future, still some time to get going on this, but it is coming up very quickly. So this is the 2.0 CMMC model. This level 1 is going to be the same, so it's going to be the same as the CMMC level 1 before, which is going to be those 17 requirements, the FAR 17. And that's just basic cybersecurity hygiene. And this level 2 is now the old level 3. And so this is going to be those 110 practices that are in NIST 800-171. They have taken out those additional 20 controls. They were very repetitive, just a lot of paperwork. And so they took a lot of that out to simplify the process for small businesses. That's a lot of the reason why they changed the model in the first place, is because when CMMC 1.0 was put forth, there was a lot of backlash, especially from small businesses, just saying, you know, there's no way that we can do this. And so luckily we have been persistent with that, told them as well, because as a small business ourselves, it's a lot to take in, right? So they have changed the model to help small businesses. And so this level 2 is just going to be that NIST 800-171 framework without those 20 additional controls. And then this level 3 is going to be the old level 5. So these are going to be the Lockheed Martins, the Boeings, those companies that are dealing with huge projects that we want protected at the highest level. So these will be, as far as assessments go, a level 1 will be an annual assessment. So like we're doing now with NIST 800-171, but it will only be for those 17 controls. A level 2 will be third-party assessments for those critical national security information. And so we don't know exactly what that means quite yet. I imagine it will be for those projects, like I was saying, that are going to be high-level weapon systems, different nuclear information, things like that. But that will be stated in your contract that you will have to have that third-party assessment before that is awarded. So you'll know beforehand. And those that are not stated will have to do an annual self-assessment for certain selected programs. And then level 3, these will be assessed by the government every 3 years. This will be from the government themselves, so it won't be a third party. It will be directly from the DoD. So you see here, here's the differences between CMMC Model 1.0 and CMMC Model 2.0. You see that these are color-coded. So level 1 has stayed the same as level 1. This level 3 is the new level 2, and the level 5 is the new level 3. So you'll see that they took out level 2 and level 4 to simplify the process. And for each practice, the organization will have to prove that they have implemented the practice, document how it is implemented, and demonstrate that resource to be able to sustain that implementation. And so that's a lot of what we do as Totem Tech, is we help those companies to build their system security plan, right? You have to show how you're compliant to these controls, and you have to give evidence as to how you're compliant. And that's what the assessors are looking for as they're coming through doing these assessments. So a question that we get all the time from our clients is, how do you know what is CUI? So here in this DODI 5200.48, this is where the DoD calls out specifically how you can know what is CUI and their process and their rules for determining what is CUI. So you'll see in this 3.7, it says that CUI will be identified in security classification guides, or SCGs. So the government is to tell you what is to be CUI and what is not CUI. So this isn't always perfect, I know. So on the hate-based side of things, we have been asking our contracting officer for about 3 years, and it was only in August, I believe, that we finally met with them. And after 3 years, they finally gave us a security classification guide. So it's important to know what could be considered CUI, because that's still going to fall under the organization to protect that, even if it's not specifically stated by the DoD. So ideally, they are going to give you that security classification guide to tell you what is CUI and what is not. If you haven't received any of those, then I would open up that conversation with your contracting officer and say, hey, we need to know what is CUI, what is not CUI, so that we know how to fulfill our contract, right? So in 5.0 or 5.1, excuse me, the program office requiring activity must identify DoD CUI at the time of contract award. So like I said, at the time of contract award, you should receive that security classification guide to tell you what is CUI and what is not. So breaking down controlled unclassified information. So as we talked about before, our largest subset here is this FCI, the federal contract information. A subset of that is the CUI, or controlled unclassified information. And then most often, in the defense space, we're going to be dealing with the CDI, or controlled defense information. And then that's kind of broken down into 4 different tiers. So we have the critical infrastructure, nuclear propulsion and nuclear information. And most of what our clients deal with is the CTI, or controlled technical information. So this can be a wide variety of things. So here's a few examples that you can see here on the screen. It can be anything from research and engineering data, different drawings, specifications, process sheets, manuals, technical reports, data sets, all sorts of things you can see here on the screen. It is supposed to be called out to you what you are to protect. And this is definitely not everything that could be considered CUI. I've talked to clients in the past that have even had things like addresses to different military bases that are considered CUI, right? So their shipping departments have had to protect things a little bit differently. So there's a few examples, but definitely not limited to this list. So again, I encourage you to open up that conversation and find out what is CUI and get that security classification guide. So here's just a little bit more examples of what could be considered CUI. A lot of it is the same: process sheets, manuals, things like that. Okay, so here is a tool that we have created, and it's kind of helpful to look at. This is how we, within our organization, we have these printed out for our team, and this is how we determine what is considered CUI. And so, first of all, the first question is this information related to a COTS product? So if your product is a COTS product, commercial off the shelf, it's not built specifically for the DoD, then it is not considered CUI. CUI is going to be things that are built specifically for the government, built to their specifications. So if it is a COTS product, then it is not considered CUI. And then you can go through, the next one is DFAR 7012 or other language requiring protection of DoD CUI in your contract. So we'll look through your contract and look through that information to see if that is called out specifically within your contract. So the next one, if you're dealing with ITAR, then it is likely considered CUI. Almost always it is considered CUI. And then, did you generate the information or did you receive the information? If so, do you have a security classification guide? Is it called out in that security classification guide? And if so, it's going to be considered CUI. So this is helpful, and we have this as a resource, and I can pop this in the chat here in a second, so that you can have access to this. That it could be a huge help. So next, we want to look at the information lifecycle. You know, where does the information come from? How is it stored? So first, we look at where does it come from? Do we receive this information, or do we generate this information? Who do we send it to? Is it from a customer? Is it from a different vendor? Do we make it ourselves? How do we make it, right? Then we have to look at how are we marking this information? How do we know that it's CUI? And then we go into how is this information stored? Is it stored locally on file share? Is it stored in the cloud? And then we can look at who has access to that information. Is it stored locally? Is it over the network? What employees have access to this information, right? Who are we sending this to? And then next is, how do we send this out, right? Disseminated externally. As we're sending this to customers, as we're sending this to our clients, or if we're sending this to the DoD, how are we sending that? Is it secure? And then last is, how is it disposed of? So NIST also has a requirement in 800-88 that says that we have to destroy anything that has CUI on it once it is done serving its purpose. So how do we get rid of this information? And so this is how we characterize the whole process of handling CUI. So CMMC is coming. We've had a lot of people panic about this, but it's not time to panic just yet. So what we tell our clients, and especially now with the CMMC 2.0, there's not a lot that is going to change, really. If you're handling controlled unclassified information, you're going to be under that NIST 800-171, which you should have been doing anyway. And so not a whole lot is going to change. But once this requirement comes out, it is going to be affecting some people's contracts. So what we tell people right now is do what is in force right now. Work on your system security plan based on that NIST 800-171. Develop a plan of action and milestones, because once you go through that self-assessment, you'll see a lot of your gaps, and then you'll be able to determine, you know, what gaps do I need to close? You can put those gaps into your plan of action and milestones and put plans forth to be able to close those gaps and to be completely compliant. And then the last one is to develop and implement an incident response plan. So you have to, if you're a DoD contractor and you're handling CUI, you have to have the ability to report to the DoD if a data breach was ever to happen. So those three things are what we're telling clients to work on right now. And a lot of this you can do yourself. And a lot of this is stuff that you've already been doing. It's just a matter of documenting and showing proof for these things. So next, I just want to offer this free ebook. So this cybersecurity ebook goes over everything in detail of what you'll need to know as a DoD contractor. So if you want a copy of this free ebook, just email info@totem.tech. Just say, hey, I want the free ebook, and I will send those out later today. But this can be a great resource and really break down in detail everything that you'll need to know as a DoD contractor as far as cybersecurity goes. And I believe we're saving questions for the end. So thank you so much for letting me present. Hopefully that was helpful, and I'd be happy to answer any questions towards the end.
Thank you so much, Chris. And yes, we'll continue to put your questions in the chat, and we'll have our team review the questions available. And we're thankful that Chris and the rest of the presenters are still going to be around to answer questions for you at the end. But thank you, sir. Thank you again.
Perfect. Thanks,
So next we're going to be moving to our next speaker from the Trade Adjustment Assistance Center, who's supporting New York, New Jersey, and Puerto Rico, which is our Teresa Stockton, who's the Client Development Manager there. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
I think the swag one is popular demand. Love some swag. I don't have any of them.
All right, you ready for me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you loud and
Perfect.
clear.
Okay, perfect.
Loud and
Okay,
clear.
just want to make sure. All right, thanks, Annette. Good morning, everybody. My name is Teresa Stockton, and I'm with the Trade Adjustment Assistance for Firms Funding Program. You can go to the next slide, Nelson, please. So usually when I'm in a crowd or presenting in person, one of the questions that I ask is, has anybody ever heard of trade adjustment assistance? And usually most people have not heard of us. So I'm supplying this visual here for you to actually see who we are and why I have this position and why this program was created. We all know the current events of today, and all these cargo ships are stuck out in the middle of the ocean and they can't get in. But what the Trade Adjustment Assistance program does is it specifically helps trade injured manufacturers. So if you can't tell from this picture why we are trade injured, why our manufacturers are suffering, this is a perfect visual to unfortunately see what is coming into this country and how we are losing, a lot of jobs, and a lot of manufacturers are closing. And so that's how we came about. We've been around since about 1978. And one of the main reasons I'm part of this presentation is because our program actually helps and gives funding to or for trade injured manufacturers. So next slide, please. So who we are, what it is, what do we do? We are actually through the Department of Commerce, and then through the EDA, Economic Development Administration. And our mission basically is to help import impacted manufacturers, U.S. manufacturers and service firms become more globally competitive. And how we do that is we help the manufacturer, the employer, with funding. Some people may have heard of TAA for employees, and that's where employees who have been let go because their job is shipped out of the country, they get funding to go to school and unemployment. Our program helps the employers. Next slide, please. So how do you become eligible for the program, and what is this, what is this used for? So like I said, one of the main reasons I was a part of this when Anna invited me is that, listening to the two gentlemen prior to us, sometimes there's costs associated with getting these projects to, do governmental contracts and all. Our program specifically covers knowledge-based services. So one of the things is, if these gentlemen had, if there's costs involved and all that, our funding can pay for that. But who's eligible? Who can get this funding? So to get this funding, you have to be a manufacturer or service firm that's been in business at least 2 years. and have had to experience a decline in domestic sales or production of at least 5% and a decline of employment of at least 5%. So how we look at things, and these declines have to be due in part to foreign competition. So like a very quick example would be if you did $2 million in sales last year and you did $1 million in this year, and you had 10 employees last year and you have 9 employees this year, according to those numbers, you have obviously hit the 5% parameters. Now, of your $1 million loss, only 5% of that has to be due to foreign competition. How do we prove this? So how we prove this and how this works is we do a pre-qualification process. So what we'll do is there's 4 steps to this program. We'll start with pre-qualification. Then we look at if you do qualify, we'll do a petition for you. And then the next step is an adjustment proposal. And then the 4th step is project implementation. Next slide, please. So what is pre-qualification? How does this work? So next slide, please. What we would do is very simply send you a very simple spreadsheet, and how we look at everything is we look at everything as current year to date. So we don't look at the manufacturer's fiscal year or anything of that nature, or calendar year of a January to December. We look at everything current year to date. And very simply, what we look at is we look at your profit and loss statements for your net sales. And if you export more than 5% of what you do, then we ask you to subtract it. But usually we work with companies that are, very simple with just, net sales. And then we also look at your total employment. So we're looking for 5% losses in both of these. And so this form here, it automatically calculates it. Either the manufacturer can start, can do this, or they can give me all the paperwork to do it. And this is one of the things when I talk about the advantages and how our program is set apart than most any other kind of federally funded programs, is that we do all the work for you. You have to supply us some data, of course, but we will actually do every bit of it, because I know when people hear federally funded programs, you usually do not get all warm and fuzzy with that. It's fear of like, oh no, I'll never qualify. I don't have the staff. I don't have the time. And I can assure you that this is going to be one of the easiest programs that you ever do, because mainly I do all the work for you. So that's a plus. So this is how we start. Next slide, please. We're looking to determine the 5% losses. Once we determine that you have, gotten the 5% losses in both categories, sales and employees, then I'm just going to turn around and say, okay, this is exactly what I need from you. And I give you a list with examples, and you give me the data. I will then complete this petition for you, and then we send it to the EDA, the Economic Development Administration, and they are the ones that actually approve this. And our approval rate is very high. I'd say like 99%. Every once in a while, we get a one-off that we're putting a square peg in a round hole, but usually we'll tell the companies right off the bat that you may not get qualified, but most of our companies get qualified for this. There's no cost to this, and it's typically 90 to 120 days, not of your time, but of me putting it together, and then it's sitting, sending it to the EDA and them approving your petition. Okay, next slide, please. So this is where our funding and what can you use it for? So one of the first questions I'm always asked by my manufacturers is, can I use it for capital projects or equipment? And it cannot be used for anything. If you can touch it, pretty much we cannot pay for it. It's for knowledge-based services. So everything that the 2 gentlemen had talked about prior to me here presenting, that's knowledge-based services. So our funding can cover any of their costs. But for example, it can be used for marketing, management, IT, ERP systems are very are not like number one in what our manufacturers use, or ISO certifications, or some of the getting governmental contracts, things of that nature. So those are all things covered by our program. Next slide, please. So what is this? What do I get if I'm, I go through this process and I'm approved? So here's where we are set apart from 99% of most any other funding programs you're going to find. We're a disbursement funded program. We are not reimbursement, where you have to come up with all the money. say 10 Hail Marys and hopefully get reimbursed. Ours is disbursement from the get-go. And you have two options. The first option is up to $30,000 of total project funding. The firm would pay 25% of the project cost, and our program pays 75% of the project cost. And we pay that project cost directly to the vendor of your choosing. So if you choose to use a vendor, like I said, one of the two gentlemen prior to me, and there's a fee involved and they're going to charge you $30,000, our firm or our program would pay 75% or 22,500 to them. This project would only cost the manufacturer $7,500. The next level of funding, and it's completely up to the manufacturer what level they choose, we do not dictate this, is up to $150,000 of project funding. And the firm would now pay $75,000 and we pay $75,000 directly to their vendor of their choosing. Next slide, please. So then once you're approved and once you choose what level of funding you want, the next step would be it's called an adjustment proposal, but really what it is it's like a business plan. We're going to do a mini diagnostic review of your company, and we're going to say, okay, now that you have, this funding and you chose the level of funding you want, tell us what the projects are that you want to do. We do all this for you. We put it all together. We send it to the EDA. It's more of a formality to make sure you're spending the funding correctly. And then they approve it and it comes back, and then you can immediately start to spend this funding. So if you go to the next slide, please. So here's where we're different, and here's the advantages of our funding. So again, when you hear federal funding, you do not think simple in the same terms there. But this is a very simple process for the applicant. We are disbursement funding. So really at the end of the day, it's like you don't have to worry about any funds or tax liabilities because you do not receive any of the money directly. It goes directly to your vendor. Once you're approved into this program, you have 5 years to spend this funding. So you may say, geez, I just finished a huge ERP project or ISO certification or something of that nature. Well, that's okay. If you can't spend it for the next year or two, I'm assuming in 5 years, you're going to find something to spend this money on. Now, the funding can be used for multiple projects and multiple vendors. And one of the big things with this program, again, that sets us apart is that while we want you to become more globally competitive and grow your sales and, and your employee base, if you do not, if you stay flat or even go backwards, there's no penalties or clawbacks with this funding. So I used to say back when I first started many years ago that this was free money. This is not free money. It is our tax dollars at work. And this program really works very well. So it's easy, which again, when you hear federal funding, easy doesn't always, equate to that. But ours is different in that we really try very diligently and understand that manufacturers don't always have a lot of time for these types of programs. So that's why we do it for you. Now, you can also find other programs, and Annette, who will be following me in this presentation, we work a lot with the MEPs across the states and all that, and they hone in more on a local level. So they know, a variety of different types of funding sources that I may not be aware of on the federal level that can actually pay for the other cost that you have to pay, whether it's 25 or 50%, whatever you choose. So again, a lot of times funding programs do not allow you to mix funds. We do not care where you get your share. So some of these projects may cost you nothing. So at the end of this whole, story, what is this? It's like getting a knowledge-based service for 50 to 75% off. Now, some of the things I want to just highlight is that if you already have a project in place, we cannot pay for anything that has been billed or retroactive, but we can pay for, if you do it in phases, we can pay for anything that hasn't been built. So we can work with in-process projects. It just can't be billed or, retroactive. So that's one question I get answered a lot. Now, another question I get asked a lot is how do you prove foreign competition? So how we prove foreign competition is asked to speak to a couple of the manufacturer's customers. With their permission, I actually will send the manufacturers the questions I ask their customers, and I give them the answers that we need to hear. So there's nothing that's very, like sneaky or anything of that nature. The 4 questions are very simply, are you currently working with this company and what do you purchase from them? The second and third questions are yes or no questions, and they have to answer yes to both of these. And it's, have you gotten a quote for a like or similar product directly or indirectly outside of the country? And has this caused you to lessen your purchases to this company? And the fourth and final question is, what is the country of origin? Sometimes this piece can be an objection for the manufacturers because they get nervous that we're gonna, say something wrong, or that their customers may have fear, or why is she calling? And what we do is, this is how we approach it. Mr. Customer, I'm currently working with this manufacturer, and they are looking to become more globally competitive. So they're applying for a federal award program. So it's a very positive, conversation with their customers. So it's a great program. It's been around since 1978. It is a rolling grant. So while the data can be 120 days old, if they miss that time frame, they just give me the next month's data. So it's a very, like I say, very simple, easy process. And I believe, like I said, at the end, they'll have questions and answers, and I'll be happy to, answer any questions that anybody may have on this program. And then if you have any, like I said, if you're interested in the program, please, feel free to contact me through this. I believe, they're going to have information after this where they're going to send our information. But I'm located actually in Binghamton, New York. So if there's somebody actually outside of New York or New Jersey or Puerto Rico where I cover this, because it is a federal program, I can send you to the office where you need to be. So we're here for you. We're here to help, and we're here to help fund any kind of projects that you need that are knowledge based.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Teresa. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to any questions you may have at the end, so Teresa and the other speakers can definitely address.
Thank you.
Right. Well, hopefully you guys been enjoying the different opportunities available and the different information been talked about today so far. Next, we're going to be inviting NextCorp with the MEP overview by Annette Brenner, Senior Business Advisor. And go ahead, Annette, and you can take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to make sure everybody can hear me. All good?
It's all good.
Perfect. Okay. Well, first of all, Teresa made my job a whole lot easier. So thank you, Teresa, because she covered a lot of what MEPs do and what we do in parallel, and then also how we cooperate. So I'll go into a little bit more detail there. And then I do have one disagreement, which you'll laugh about, Teresa, when we get to it. So thank you. Next slide. So MEP, as we call ourselves, the Manufacturing Extension Partnership, is another program that is funded through NIST. So yes, you've heard NIST associated with DFARS. Now we're the MEP associated with NIST, and we've been in existence basically to help small to mid-sized manufacturers become more competitive. So our focus is those manufacturers under 500 that are located in the 50 states and Puerto Rico. And how do we make them more competitive? So you can see how we have a natural partnership with Trade Adjustment Assistance Center as well, because export is a huge part of manufacturing within the United States. So we're funded by NIST. What MEP does is provide access to a network of experts around the country and around the world, depending on the projects. And we serve as a conduit for grant funding. So some centers will do direct consulting, other ones will partner with consultants, but our goal is also always trying to make those projects more affordable. So you do them sooner and faster. You don't put them 2 years away, you do them in the next quarter instead. So one of my targets anytime I'm talking to a manufacturer is to strategize and think what projects really make a difference to you, and then what potential partners that you don't have as employees. So these outside resources, these outside consultants, like the ones we heard earlier, how can they help you do that necessary task sooner and faster and help you grow your business? So if we look at last year, what MEPs were able to accomplish across the country, working with 27,500 manufacturers, leading to $13 billion more in sales, almost $3 billion in cost savings. new client investments of 5 billion, and then also help to retain over 100,000 jobs. So what's key there is, again, we're looking to help manufacturers gain jobs and things like that. So there are MEP centers throughout each of the 50 states and Puerto Rico. And what's key here is our mission across all these organizations is the same, to help small to mid-sized manufacturers. How that is specifically done may vary center to center. And then some actually have like incubator and prototype spaces and trial manufacturing lines within their systems as well. So it really depends state to state. But we also can communicate within the state or within the US if you have a particular need for some unique supplier or a unique material. We can cross communicate within our supplier network and potentially get you that help from anywhere in the nation as it's needed. And again, hopefully funding to help support that. If you go to the next slide, I'll cover specifically New York State. And that's the key website for you to go to see who is your direct center in New York, newyorkmep.org. So there are 10 regional centers and 1 statewide center. The statewide center is Fuse Hub, and they have done quite a bit around cybersecurity. They have put together a cybersecurity cohort for the state. So if you want to be part of that cohort and have access to some of the training and webinars that they have hosted, I highly recommend going to fusehub.com. And the other piece of what they do is they've provided funding. I don't know the total number of projects they funded. My focus for NextCore is within the Finger Lakes. But so within the Finger Lakes, we funded roughly 20 companies through Fuse Hub dollars to do assessments targeting NIST FARS 800-171 and then also CMMC. And then there's also going to be likely more going forward that Fuse Hub has available. We haven't yet heard what's on the table for 2022 as we're wrapping up 2021 numbers for year end. So again, there's 10 regional centers. You can see them divided on the state map, and those fit the economic development centers that the state has designated as well. So it's divided by county. So whichever county you are in is then which regional MEP center would represent you. I listed 3 out of the 10, not knowing exactly where all the audience would be from, but that website will definitely cover the entire state. NextCore covers Monroe County, which is Rochester, New York, and the surrounding 8 counties. Southern Tier MEP is based out of Binghamton and covers basically the 8 counties in the Southern Tier. You see Western New York covers Buffalo and that region. New York City has ITAC, which covers New York City, and then also Stony Brook, which covers Long Island. There's a central region, a North Country, Hudson Valley. Now you're going to test my New York geography, and I think I'm going to stop right there. What's key though is our funding partners. So yes, we are funded as New York MEP through NIST, but then we also are part of NISTAR, which is the New York Division of Science, Technology, and Innovation. They actually hold our contract. That's the federal contract. And then we also receive some state dollars for from Empire State Development and some other programs with that. But one key thing I do want to highlight while I have your attention is a lot of funding opportunities are regionally based. So MEP is federal. New York State has specific funding that can help toward programs and projects. And then New York State also has something called the Consolidated Funding Application you may have heard of. And that goes through these economic development regions. So when Teresa was talking about how do you pay for that building expansion, how do you pay for that equipment you're bringing in, those types of dollars, to me, when you're talking anything over $100,000 of equipment or building, time to start looking at a consolidated funding application within your regional economic development. But then also go even smaller, like look at the county you're in and what dollars they have specifically for capital projects as well as workforce development. And so a lot of times there's now workforce training as we focus on apprenticeships and folks like that. How do we fill our pipeline of employees? We're getting very granular into the counties, the cities, even the chambers are now getting involved for very small regional efforts to help support manufacturing across the board. So what I always also say is identify who your MEP center is, who that rep is, and then have those communications a couple times a year to say, I'm trying to do XYZ, what's out there to help? And hopefully we can find some resources to help you. And so the one thing, the next slide, the one disagreement I have with Teresa is the easiest funding to get is sometimes our programs, because all we need is a manufacturing NAICS code and a DUNS number. And so you've already heard earlier about all the DUNS number. The manufacturing NAICS codes are the 31, 32, 33, WXYZ. So it's a 6-digit code that talks about what you're manufacturing. And that's what we need to qualify you to work within the MEP system. And when I talk about partnering with Trade Adjustment Assistance Center, we have some wonderful programs in New York. If you happen to pay NYSEG, RG&E, or National Grid Electric Service, so they have put some funding aside to reinvest into the manufacturing community, and we administer and help support those funding opportunities. They're called the Manufacturing Accelerator Program. Not all folks are eligible for it, so I didn't want to go into a big deep dive here on that. But for instance, right now through that program, we currently have, I think it's 10 projects around DFARS and CMMC, basically looking to be compliant, and then any remediations that need to be done. So again, those soft services help support that. And then where we can, we give Teresa a call and say, I think this company will qualify for your funding as well. And then we can complement these two programs, which will then lead to 75% in return on funding. Ours, unfortunately, is almost always reimbursement. Teresa has the advantage of the direct support as the project's going on. But again, happy to partner and happy to basically optimize what your opportunity is for the resources that are there. And I know we have questions at the end, so my contact information is on the last slide. If I am not your representative and you're not in the Finger Lakes, I'm happy to link you to my partners throughout the state. Not all of them are necessarily as nice as I am, but they're great folks, and I'm happy to introduce you and work with you. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Annette. And I guess at this time, we're going to open up for questions from anybody who had questions in the chat. I just have my team, if you guys want to unmute yourself and bring up any of the questions that you guys were tracking during the meeting and that we didn't cover. And you can go ahead and go after the question. Also, if you want to raise your hand and unmute yourself, feel free to ask a question.
Thank you, Nelson, for sharing that. I have some questions for Teresa and from previously. This is a question from Pichai. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Pichai. The question is, does U.S. EDA assist firms like mine seeking international projects where we need to compete with other international firms? If not, could you tell us what U.S. agency does this?
So when it comes to our program, if you hire a consultant that helps you with this type of projects, our funding would pay for that consultant. Our program itself doesn't do any of the consulting or any of the work. It just we're a funding source, okay? I can look in to see, I do have, connections through the Department of Commerce, especially with my export group, that may be able to see if there is a U.S. agency that will work, specifically with these kind of international projects. I also see he has another question about selling mobile incinerators and other technologies, and do we provide funding to assist in paying for the mobile incinerator manufacturer? So what happens is that if the manufacturer can hit, can get our 5% losses, can prove of 5% in sales and employee losses due in part to foreign competition, we would help the manufacturer directly. That is not that's not a problem. We don't work with like resellers or anything like retail, but we would work directly with the manufacturers.
Teresa, this is Anna, how are you? Can you clarify in this instance, do they have to be, if you're purchasing from a manufacturer, does it have to be a US manufacturer?
Yeah, so what we have to have, it has to be US, the companies that we help specifically have to be, a US manufacturer. We are finding, though we actually did certify a company that is a wholly owned subsidiary or affiliate of an international company. So we just, there was a company in Rochester, but their headquarters, their parent company was in China. But because they were wholly owned here in the United States, then we can work with that company. If it's a division of a foreign company, then we cannot. But wholly owned subsidiaries and affiliates, we can. We also we've had some situations where companies have lost export dollars, where in the fact that they're getting hit hard out of the country, they're losing their export sales. We specifically work with domestic sales loss, not foreign sales loss.
Right, and if you're a manufacturer or other type of service company looking to get CMMC certified or maybe need some additional assistance, it's certainly something they should speak to both you and Annette, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Our funding would cover that.
And the other thing I'll mention, thank you, Teresa, because that was a great answer and it's a great question. There is a group called Global New York that is sponsored through the Empire State Development that does focus on exporting and then work overseas. And so looking at that, and also the Department of Commerce has a group that looks at the STEP program. So if attending trade shows and any of your information needs to be translated or adapted to a foreign language, that's when I typically think of those other programs to help complement what we do.
Okay, great. So, thank you for sharing that. So for our next question is for the same person, Pichai. We sell mobile incinerator and other technologies. Do you provide funding to assist us in paying for the mobile incinerator manufacturer?
Yeah, I think Teresa covered that.
Okay.
So I would again point you toward like Empire State Development toward the consolidated funding application, because you're probably talking a significant capital expense that could then potentially fit those programs. Or the energy companies also have capital incentive programs if it reduces waste and it improves processing efficiency. So there may be some, but it's going to be a case by case where and who to apply to.
And with our program, like I had mentioned, is that if you can touch it, we pretty much cannot pay for it. We're knowledge based. So that would be where Annette's group would come in to, with some of their programs and funding that they may be able to find some along with me. I mean, I can try to help. And that's one of the things I try to do is even if our program cannot help, we try to help, if they do have questions like this, to try to direct them to the right, the right agencies.
Great. Great. And I think you covered the last question about, I think you believe, does the manufacturer be US based?
Yeah.
And dealing with format, I believe you covered that already.
There's one question from Bill Hazley who asked, would CUI have to be identified at the time of solicitation to determine if you qualify to bid for a project? Maybe Chris can add some value there.
Yeah, absolutely. So ideally, that is the way that it's supposed to work. And especially going forward with CMMC, you have to have that certification before you can bid on certain contracts. So you have to be capable to handle the CUI before they're even going to consider you as being that contractor.
Great. Any other questions? Anybody want to unmute themselves and ask a verbal question? Please go ahead.
Yeah, I got a question.
Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Pedro Chavez. I'm from Tratado LLC. We're recipients of NIST funds for a PPP project. And what we have done is identify the need for data to help the entire ecosystem, meaning the manufacturing of PPE equipment locally. how would that, how would this, the need of this data apply to your program, given the fact that we may have to show more like different companies' data losses as opposed to an individual loss?
Okay, that question for me then, for the trade adjustment? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So what, again, we have to work directly with are you a manufacturer directly?
We are a manufacturer.
So you are the manufacturer. All right, so if you're the manufacturer, and then what happens is we're just gonna look at your profit and loss statements, you know, and then your employee records to show those losses. So we only need to look at your information.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then Pedro,
Yeah, because
Teresa had mentioned that they might have to meet the other standard, they might ask a question to any of your clients. So,
Sure.
and depending on how they answer that question, then they'll be able to move forward.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, my apologies. So
Yeah.
I do not ask anything from your clients from a standpoint of any sales numbers. I do not talk to them at all about that. It's just those yes or no questions. Have they lessened their purchases? It's just a simple yes or no, and they have to answer yes. I will ask you their sales numbers to determine the loss. All right, so you need to give me those numbers, not your customers. Nor do I ask them who they're going to. I ask them, you know, what is the country of origin? Are you going to Canada, Mexico? But I do not say who they're going to. So literally that phone call is like 30 seconds. It's yes, I work with them. I buy this widget. Yes, I've gotten quotes. Yes, I've lessened the purchases, and now I'm going to China. So, but I will come to you and say, okay, what was the sales numbers for this, you know, for this customer, so we can show that loss.
Sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Anybody want to mute themselves? Go ahead. Going once. Going twice. All right. I want to thank you, all my speakers, for joining us today. I want to thank Christopher from Totem Tech, and please take advantage of the booklet that he's offering for free. That could definitely add value. I want to thank Teresa for her presentation on TAA. I want to thank Annette for her presentation at MEP. And of course, I want to thank John Duncan, the program manager for SPRS, to kind of walk us through that process. Can be a little confusing for our clients. And I want to thank all the partners at the PTACs in New York State who partnered with us to share this event. And we look forward to holding more events like this in the next couple of months. And I want to thank you again and look forward to working with you guys again. And please reach out to your PTAC if you need technical assistance. And we're here to help you, walk you through the process, and connect you with anybody who was on the call today if you need it. Also, this call was recorded, so we're going to be providing the recording to the attendees if you just want to review what happened today again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.